Hello and welcome back to a slightly different NAS comparison than normal. Today we want to look at a couple of rack mount devices that, although are something of a stretch from what we normally talk about here on the channel, because of rising storage costs, because of businesses looking at data egress costs on the cloud and still thinking about going bare metal, weirdly a number of you actually want to see these two devices get compared. Something of a David versus Goliath, or Goliath versus Goliath, or maybe Dave versus Dave. Today we want to compare the UniFi ENAS and the 45Drives and Unraid collaboration, the X15. Two large-scale rack-mount storage devices with very different ways of supporting you and your data, but pretty much targeting the same user. Now, out the gate, I will say right now, one of the main motivations for this video is both of these have already had a video out about them here on the channel, but I'm still working on their testing. I've done all of the hard drive testing, the thermal and the power testing, but I'm still trying to source the SSDs without breaking the bank of the channel. So in the meantime, because so many of you were reaching out about them, I decided to do the comparison now. Today we're going to talk about the storage, we're going to talk about the design, we're going to talk about the hardware, and of course, we're going to talk about the old Wonga. That aside, before we even get on to the design, we at the very least have to acknowledge that this arriving at $3,999 and an additional $315 surcharge, and this arriving at $2,999, a number of you are already going to make a decision based on that number at checkout. Also, realistically, this is Ubiquiti and 45Drives and Unraid. I know that these two solutions here with their 2 and 1 brand are very much going to have their target audience in terms of simplified, almost corporate network structure versus that of indie home labber, slight kind of open sourcey work with you, work with us sort of branding. So definitely we have to at least acknowledge those two factors for a number of you that are going into this with certain preconceptions, or at the very least certain ideas of what you were looking at for your business. But in terms of design, I will say, given they're both rack mounts of nearly identical storage profile, they really have gone a different route. Now, Ubiquiti have approached design on the ENAS by reprofiling the same chassis as we've seen them do before with their U-NAS series. The ENAS takes advantage of the large-scale Protect surveillance hardware in terms of its overall design. It's not identical. There's lots of stuff that's unique to the ENAS, but it does take advantage of 16 bays of hot swappable SATA storage there on the front, with click and load trays there at the front, can't be locked. But at the very least, whether it is you're going to be doing that for a RAID recovery or expanding storage over time, it's pretty darn straightforward. It includes the rail kit alongside nice lockable handles there for loading it into your rack mount. You may also have noticed it is a 3U, and well, the other one ain't a 3U, but we'll get to that in a bit. Also, the front of this system, alongside those 16 bays of storage, you can purchase separately a bezel here that will allow you to add on an LCD touchscreen display there and RGB lighting all the way around the front. Whether you use it, I don't know, but it is quite nice to have that real-time information, and you can perform some of the setting and troubleshooting of your device via that touchscreen, but it is an optional purchase. Now, if we turn it around, although we will get onto the ports and stuff later on, and we can talk about the 5-fan cooling system that runs through it, and there's additional fans there based in the middle behind the SATA base. But alongside that, we've got redundant PSU, so dual PSUs there, which are included, so you don't have to buy a separate PSU, but you can have another one on the shelf. But if one fails, easy to remove, grab yourself a new one and slot it in. But crucially, the system can still run off the other one, so your failover is fine. Overall, it's quite a classical approach to a rack mount design, whereas when it comes to 45Drive, one of their biggest reputation pluses in the eyes of many is their design towards their enclosures, the Storinator, some of their flash systems, the Proxinator, all of their different, from desktop to rack mount forms chassis, utilize an in-house design. They're all built on site in Canada, and it's real easy on the eye. Let's be realistic with the Signature series in collaboration with Unraid having this panel, but you can get custom panels made if you choose. Alongside that, as mentioned, height difference. This takes advantage of 4U. Now, why is this taller? Nice and simple. It's because this doesn't take advantage of traditional trays. This takes advantage of a slot-loaded design. Now, that slot-loaded design is not without its problems. It's great in terms of integrating and troubleshooting and seeing everything in operation, as well as accessing the inside here of the motherboard, whether you're going to be upgrading or performing some of that troubleshooting there. But it will say not having direct LEDs based on the front for when I want to monitor my drives, or at the very least see which drives are active, or in the event of a drive failure, actually knowing which drive has failed. I would have liked to have seen an LCD being built in here, or at the very least LEDs to give me real-time information about which one of these drives fails. Because if I have to perform a RAID swap out, yes, these bays are numbered along the top, but I will say I would like to be able to see at least a light or an indication very, very clearly which drive is the one in trouble before I start removing another one out. You may notice no trays. This system takes advantage of direct slot load design that meets into the connector directly inside power and data. So it's not lockable per se, but then neither is the UniFi offering. I will say, in terms of convenience, notwithstanding there's one extra bay on this 16, although I wouldn't recommend spending over $1,000 for that, I will say that accessing your drives and for troubleshooting, this will definitely feel smoother. I kind of wish they went for like a half removal system, because you have to effectively pull the entire chassis out of the rack cabinet to access just the drive bays there, which again, you don't really want to have too much movement if there is a potential drive issue. Not so much a drive failure, but when there is warning signs. Also, turning the device around, there's only one PSU. Now, it's a 1000-watt Corsair PSU, but still, only the one desktop PSU going inside there, which I know for some is going to be somewhat off-putting, given that you haven't got a redundant power supply option there, although you can take advantage of something like a UPS, but also removing it is quite the undertaking, and if that PSU fails, your system obviously falls over. The other thing you may have noticed between these two is PCIe upgrade slots here. We will go more into the hardware later on, but that's just a small indication of the scalability of this solution in a more customized fashion. This is scalable with 2 expansion ports there, allowing you to add expansion devices from UniFi. But that's the key word, from UniFi or Ubiquiti. This device here is targeted way more towards right of repair, utilizing your own components, using your own software, and customization coming out of the wazoo. You need to know what you're doing, but do keep that in mind that there is something of a fixed profile when it comes to buying a UniFi NAS than you will have buying a 45-drive solution. But realistically, we've got to talk about hardware, because that is one massive area of difference between them. Now, in terms of traditional hardware spec, much like the design of these two devices, Ubiquiti and 45Drives have gone very much their own way and have their own priorities. And although you would assume the one that is way more expensive out the gate is the more powerful of the two in terms of traditional hardware, although it does on the numbers win, it doesn't win by massive amount. And that is to do with a change in priorities. Starting with 45Drives this time, that $2,999 figure for the hardware you're getting under the bonnet is pretty good, I will say. And remember, it is pre-built, pre-burned, tested, and the works. It is arriving with a 20-core, 28-thread i7 14th generation Intel processor. It also arrives with 16 gig of UDIM DDR4 ECC RAM. The system has a dedicated RAM card that is taking care of all of the storage, occupying one of the PCIe slots, with another one occupied with a dual 10 gig network card there, and an additional 2.5 gig port there on the rear, and a 1 gig as well for your out of bounds and more. It has 3 PCIe slots, 2 of which are occupied by the aforementioned cards, and an additional Gen 5x8 or Gen 5x16 slot, depending on how the lane layout is with the hardware spec. And there are 3 M.2 slots, 1 occupied with the OS drive and 2 available M.2 slots, one of them being Gen 5. Again, shared with the PCIe layout between the two of them. That, with the included PSU as well, is a lot of beefy hardware all being rolled in here, with the ability to expand out across the PCIe and the M.2 slots there inside. The ENAS, on the other hand, arrives with an arguably more scaled down but more focused processor. It is an ARM-based processor. It's an 8-core ARM v9 processor, the Neoverse N2. But that CPU is very, very efficient, but also bloody capable, even for an ARM. But crucially, the system also arrives with 64 gigabytes of ECC memory, which if you work in storage, and particularly you work in this kind of storage, you know 64 gig of ECC, chef's kiss. But it doesn't end there, because alongside those two components, it also arrives with dual port 25 gig and a 10 gig port, you know, for S and Gs, and a 1 gig out of bound port there for maintenance. The ECC, the 25 gig, those two elements alone, I think for a lot of users, is going to be extraordinarily attractive. That's where that additional $315, by the way, comes from the surcharge. When Ubiquiti rolled out, I believe over 280 products, had a percentage increase based on the amount of storage or memory they had because of rising costs. So $315 makes up part of that price for this to continue having 64 gig of ECC. Now, looking at these two side by side, I think it would be fair to say this is the more powerful, this is the more efficient. This is the more focused inside, this is the more focused passing through and outside with that connectivity there on the rear. The 25 gig is fantastic, and I am surprised this doesn't arrive with 25 gig. However, when you do purchase this device from UniFi's own, 45Drives' own store, there is lots of upgrade options, and you can scale this up to 64 gig of UDIM ECC RAM if you like, but it will cost you an additional $792. The same as the rails. This doesn't arrive with the rail kit. You have to spend another $88 to have the rails, and you can scale up other elements and bells and whistles, but just those two components alone bring the price of this up to $3,879. So we are getting ever closer to this. And remember, 10 gig, 25 gig. So the pricing, as I mentioned, in terms of the price, but also in terms of the hardware and where the priorities live, on balance, on points, I do think the ENAS wins in terms of hardware spec, but not by a huge amount. But I say that with the added caveat that we also have to look at the big picture for a lot of businesses, particularly in the US, on the socio-economic political climate that is components, security, and potentially the FCC one day going, nah, you can't have that anymore. Now, both of these solutions, although the designs and the IP is North American and North American, between the two of them, the components on them are all made in China or Taiwan, the internal components, the MOBOs, the CPUs, the RAM. Very little of the internal specs of these devices are actually made in the US. Some of it is constructed in the US, and definitely the design. And in the case of 45Drives, of course, this casing is hewn, if you will, in Canada, but still nonetheless, do keep that in mind. Neither of these solutions are wholly and exclusively produced in Canada or the US. Components still come from out east. Which brings us to the storage. And again, throughout the course of this section, I'll talk over this, but you're going to see the software there on screen. Between the two of them, if we focus on the ENAS first, UniFi's drive software and the NAS OS, if I had to sum it up in 3 words, it would be storage, storage, storage. It is so focused on storage that it is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness, depending on what kind of user you are. Now, the ENAS arrived with support of ZFS. That means advantages such as multi-drive parity, removal of the volume layer, RAID resilvering, inline deduplication, compression, compaction, support of iSCSI. It's the only system in their lineup that supports that, as well as greater integration of software as a service and platform as a service, SaaS and PaaS integration. But alongside that, seamless integration for the most part into the existing UniFi network controllers, the existing UniFi surveillance platform, which you will have to get a separate system to take advantage of. That integration for many users that are already putting a server into an already UniFi populated ecosystem is going to be hugely desirable. That alongside the fact that, for example, you could install the ENAS in a central location in your business and then install smaller ENAS systems for much more seamless backup between these different devices over time is going to be desirable for many. And the simplicity of that setup and that software and maintenance, the wizards and for setting up, the online tutorials, guides and courses that you can take are always going to be very, very desirable indeed. Now, 45Drives does things a different way. For a start, as mentioned, and as the colour of this device denotes on the front, they are focused on this device being a collaboration with Unraid, a DIY and build your own software platform that has already got plenty of praise online. You can take advantage of their own Houston UI integrated software platform that's available with other 45Drive solutions. You can even get a very similar or near identical profile of hardware for this, utilizing that as well as installing it with Proxmox, taking advantage of TrueNAS or any operating system you like. Ultimately, what I'm saying is 45Drives, before we even get into the weeds of the software, does allow you to use whatever software you like, install it, and it doesn't invalidate the hardware. And that extends, by the way, to freedom of your hardware to upgrade, tinker with it, and repair how you like. But the integration of Unraid on this is unique, with several elements of the user interface, several elements of the installation wizards, graphical interfaces of the individual drives and storage and more. They're built into the software, as well as the entire utility of Unraid towards containerization, towards virtualization, support of multiple different file systems there, as well as taking advantage of some of the more 45Drive focused things like RustFS and Ceph. Whether it is that you want to take advantage of Unraid on this, which would be weird if you didn't, given the included Unraid license, and some of the apps and services to integrate third-party services, as well as merging it into a mixed network and indeed installing this inside a UniFi network if you choose to, with support of the UniFi controller software that you can run on this, not the full appliance, I will say, ultimately means this is a far more flexible platform. It does mean more complexity of setup, probably more help with the sysadmin unless you know what you're doing, and a less hand-holded experience with courses available online, of course. Ultimately, between these two, if you are looking for simplicity and ease, the ENAS is going to be tremendously appealing to you. But keep in mind that some of the more aggressive hosting that goes on with a lot of users installing bare metal appliances in their business or any kind of setup really, even for the home, you're almost certainly going to need a parallel running device for a lot of that hosting, whether that is a mini PC or a workstation working alongside it. This is all about the storage, whereas the X15 is designed to do all of it and stored all within this one system. And I know there's going to be some of you that hear me say that alongside this only has one PSU that will get a slight cold shudder to run everything within one box, but many do. Ultimately, between the two of them, I will say in terms of software, it's really going to come down to what you want to use. This is so easy to set up, so easy to run. I cannot fault it in that regard. But capability, flexibility, customization in Unraid certainly is going to have an appeal. And I think that point on software pretty much sums it up, because the UniFi system, it's cheaper. The UniFi system is easier. The UniFi system has better network connectivity and all of that ECC RAM out the gate. But it's newer as well. It is a platform that, although it has existed in network tech for the longest time, is still pretty green in the world of NAS by comparison. It is a streamlined solution, an easy solution, but it is a solution with a slightly lower glass ceiling. And if you're never going to expand beyond that and all you care about is your storage, trust me, this thing's a banger. However, flexibility, customization, freedom of use, freedom of right of repair, all of these things add up to why 45Drives and indeed Unraid gel so well together on this box. Don't think of them in terms of price. You simply can't, because although this is cheaper, when it comes to the value of what you're getting and scaling things up, I do think there is relative parity in pricing. But the customization and flexibility of the X15 cannot be ignored. And for many of you, that is going to seal the deal. But let me know what you guys think. I will work more and more as soon as the sodding media arrives for the long-term testing on these with SSD. And frankly, if it gets to the end of September and I still can't do it, I'm just going to focus on the hard drives, the power and the thermals, and I apologize for the delay. But Thank you so much for watching. There are links below to get hold of these. I think it would be insane if someone watching a YouTube video spends $2,000 to $3,000 to $4,000 like that via a link in the description, but you never know. So if you are going to go ahead and get hold of one of these two devices and you found this video helpful, please use those links in order to get the job done. And it allows us, me and Eddie at NAS Compares, to get a small commission to keep doing what we do. I'll link below to other videos on these devices and other comparisons. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.